there's so many bad sequels because I feel like the essence of what made the original so interesting is the thing that's not really focused on.
Sequels are hard to make.
You look lonely.
But they're even harder to perfect.
No, you complete me.
And what might be a huge payday for the studio,
The average sequel makes 8 times the average original release.
could easily be the worst nightmare for the audience.
Darren?
Surprised to see me?
So it's always nice to see when a sequel succeeds.
Get down.
It justifies grabbing your attention for the first time
To infinity and beyond!
and reminding you why it did the second.
Besides, when it all ends, I'll have old Buzz Lightyear to keep me company.
But this is when the sequel delivers on a promise. But what happens when it goes above and beyond your wildest imagination? When you thought you had seen it all, but the studio tells you, nope, you ain't seen nothing. What happens when the sequel outshines the original? I think we can all agree that Into the Spider-Verse was one of the greatest animated movies ever created. It broke the standards of animation and raised it by a couple of levels, which for the most part was still unmatched for the past 4 years.
You're like me. A leap of faith. I'm Spider-Man.
In fact, it was so good that the Academy didn't even have a choice in the matter.
And the Oscar goes to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
So when I heard that they were doing a sequel, I'm not gonna lie, I knew it was gonna be good. But almost everyone also knew that it would take a gargantuan effort for the sequel to be anywhere near the original. So, when Across the Spiderverse started off with that drum solo, it threw me right back into the year of 2018. But when the movie ended, it threw me in a state of absolute bewilderment. How the heck did they manage to make this even better? It was 140 minutes of insanity, and if that's not what animation is all about, then it should be. And what made Into the Spider-Verse the renaissance of modern animation is the same thing that effectively makes Across the Spider-Verse a masterpiece of a sequel: the art.
We did so much on that first movie that was out of the comfort zone of an animated feature film, and it became clear that people wanted more.
You have characters that are literally made out of paper, and cities that look like they were painted with watercolors, and a multiverse that grapples with the limits of animation. When Into the Spider-Verse created a world where a comic book came to life, it had created a new way of looking at animation, perhaps a new art form. The prequel had already laid the foundation. It was right there. All they had to do was perfect it. But in fact, they took it and ran away with it.
All of their inspiration is taken from comic book artists, different fine artists. We've had to create a new tool set in order to hit all of these different looks.
Across the Spider-Verse was progression of a magnitude I had never seen before in the world of animation. It dealt with the complexities of the multiverse through the language of art.
What's special about this movie is that we can have each universe be its own complete distinct look and cinematic language. Each world is wholly distinct and unique and really unlike anything you've seen before on film.
And just like how they practically invented innovative techniques for the first movie, they got even more creative to make the worlds of the multiverse. And this meant that you could have scenes that look like this.
I got a job to do, Gwen.
It won't bring him back.
The animators used a program called Rebel to bring Gwen's world to life in the most literal sense possible.
It was more of a loose watercolor style along with influences from the comic books.
Gwen's world was composed of watercolor backgrounds that move and reflect her every mood.
I thought it would be so cool to, rather than tell people what she was thinking every second, to just have the environment change. Just react to her emotions like a mood ring.
The dripping watercolors emphasize the emotions of most of these scenes when Gwen is sad or lonely.
And in real time, shot for shot, you can watch what she's thinking change on screen behind her.
Or even shots such as these where the colors are distinctly out of character.
One of the things we really liked in her world was color doesn't always respect the boundaries of objects.
With reds and greens and purples finding themselves in strange places to add depth and feelings to every frame. One of the things that was distinct to the Spider-Verse when it came out in 2018 was how it made use of line work. The way these lines just popped up in weird places, in the backgrounds, as outlines, as lines of motion. It was literally what gave Into the Spider-Verse that comic book-like style. But when line work returned in Across the Spider-Verse, it leveled up its usage, to the point where they created their most complicated character using hand-drawn lines. Vulture was a thing of beauty, what the creators referred to as
He was a living drawing.
something that had so many intricate moving parts.
He was covered in feathers, some of them made of wood. He had pulleys that were attached to other hinges on his wings.
We had to invent tools that would make it feel like the lines were done by an artist.
But the most tangible visual experience from Across the Spider-Verse that surpasses its prequel is the sheer magnitude and scope of its artworks. And by this I mean the scale of some of these visually striking scenes. Now don't get me wrong, Into the Spider-Verse was the one that introduced us into this world regulated by colors. But some of these scenes, for the lack of a better word, were visually overwhelming to the untrained eyes. Mumbatan, the amalgamation of a futuristic Manhattan and Mumbai, could have had its own movie. It was that big.
So what we did with our camera was, rather than moving through the city horizontally, we were moving through the city vertically. And when you look down, it needed to look like it went on forever.
And not to mention the futuristic world of Nueva York, with a visual aesthetic that permeates the dimensions of science fiction. There were times when this world seemed endless, as if it had no bounds, with structures that looked infinitely vast and technology that was so advanced that not even the frames could keep up with it.
Almost like the artist is drawing it under camera at times, trying to keep up with the pace of the action that's happening, but it's always kind of slipping away.
Watching these scenes didn't feel like repetition, which, in all honesty, most people would have been happy with, but it well and truly felt like progression. It felt like they somehow managed to make the visual medium of this movie even more expressive than its prequel.
We literally made 5 movies at once, and they all have their own extremely unique qualities, and they all take just as much effort to design as one single movie would.
Drop what you're doing and stop Spider-Man.
We asked ourselves, what's the most expensive thing we could possibly write?
And this brings us to the numbers.
If he was just being chased by a reasonable number of people, I don't know if it would be any fun.
Miles versus 5 spider people.
It's not that fun. We wanted it to feel super excessive.
Numbers in characters. The original Spider-Verse had characters in all shapes and sizes, from a talking pig to an anime character. It was fun, it was novel, but most importantly, it was practical. It is one thing to have a lot of characters in a scene, but to make them all interact with the environment, now that is time consuming. And good. This is why the original Spider-Verse worked, even with all those moving parts. But when the animators went across the Spider-Verse, they elevated their game.
Miles is being chased by 200 to 300 spider people, all of them with individual render styles and looks.
Which was a spectacle, but
it took about 2 years to get this sequence together.
Something that took a ridiculous amount of effort, but turned out to be one of the greatest animated sequences of all time. And this time around, there were even weirder characters like Spider-Rex and Spider-Wolf and a Spider-Cat and Peter Parker. I really thought I had seen it all. But the fact that they painstakingly drew each and every Spider-Person, animating them separately to interact with the environment, was just something insane to see.
Phil wanted to make sure that there was something for every fan.
You had the Insomniac Spider-Man, a gunslinging Spider-Man and his Spider-Hose. There was Spider-Canada, Scarlet Spider, Spectacular Spider-Man, the Bombastic Bagman, a Lego Spider-Man, Spider-Therapist, and Spider-Bite, and I'm pretty sure I'm forgetting half of them. And these were all characters detailed and designed to fit into only a few cameos in the film. But
that stuff is what really drives the bigger movie and the crazier movie and the much more visually diverse movie.
Which brings us to some of the additions to the main cast of the film, particularly the one that sticks out the most, Hobie Brown, or Spider-Punk.
Man like Miles, my God.
arguably one of the more unique versions of Spider People we have seen in the multiverse. But the chaos was not just his personality, but also his animation style.
Everything about him was different. We had to texture him with photocopy dots and paper texture. Every frame that he moves was supposed to look like it was cut and pasted and re-put back together again.
Different parts of his body were animated at different frame rates. His jacket was animated on 4s, while his body sometimes would be on 3s, which made him feel like a paper cutout. Then there was Pavitra Prabhakar, the Indian Spider-Man, who says this.
You're saying DD.
Which is more relatable to me than you think it is. Then there's Miguel O'Hara and Jessica Drew and The Spot, who were all great additions to this sequel. More characters in a sequel does not simply make something better. They all have to serve a purpose. They have to be cogs in the machine or pieces of puzzles that give meaning to the bigger picture. And this is exactly what you'd feel after watching this movie. There were more worlds, more characters, more expansive storylines, more relatability, things that sequels should fulfill and fully appreciate. And even though the ending was a bit of a cliffhanger, it actually made me want to watch the next movie a little bit more. And speaking of which, something else that defines a perfect sequel is growth.
Miles wants to break free from being a kid, and yet he wants to stay close to his family.
Which is something that forms the essence of a Spider-Man movie. The original movie deals with a lot of these elements quite well, but because of it being the foundation, it doesn't fully delve into the growth of these characters. The storytellers seem to have waited for the sequel to do this, and they well and truly expanded these characters like I would have never imagined.
In every dimension, every spider person is dealing with the problem of how do I keep my family safe and save the world.
Peter B. Parker is now married and a proud father.
I think we've all experienced a friend or a family member who has a kid and they're a little bit more excited than the rest of the world is about that baby.
Gwen, who was portrayed as a scarred character in the original, reveals the reason behind her struggles.
She feels alone and isolated because the police officer who's hunting Spider-Woman is her father.
And Miles, who struggled to live up to the name of Spider-Man in the first movie, confronts a much different kind of struggle.
In Miles' case, that vulnerability is in the form of his two parents.
His parents are his closest friends. He doesn't just respect them and love them, he shares with them. So it really tears him up.
I think when we find our purpose and we're really working on it, we could get really caught up in it. For me, it's art, but for Miles, it's saving lives and the world.
And the growth is tangible. These characters develop in a way that is so symbolic of a Spider-Man movie. A perfect Spider-Man sequel, or even a sequel in general, will always be about expanding a story that was already relatable, so that now you get to love these characters even more for their commitment to the story.
We have an identity that is really personal to us, and maybe it won't be accepted. Maybe it will change the dynamic of your house, this secret identity, and not speaking to his parents about it. That's the stuff that ends up the most relatable.
She told me that with great power comes great responsibility.
Now this is not anything new. This is the core of a superhero. No matter where the story takes you, this should remain intact. The original Spider-Verse was about that leap of faith and learning how to be responsible as a superhero. But Across the Spider-Verse delves deeper into the ethos of a powerful being, what it is to be great, what it takes to be great. But in the end, all goes back full circle to appreciate the most important things in their lives.
Wherever you go from here, you have to promise to take care of that little boy for me. Make sure he never forgets where he came from, and he never doubts that he is loved.
Into the Spider-Verse was a legacy. It had transformed the world of animation so much that great things were expected of its successor. And almost poetically, how with great power comes great responsibility, I think it's fair to say that the creators wielded that power responsibly. Across the Spider-Verse wasn't just a good sequel that it was meant to be. No, it was more than that. It was a visual masterpiece beyond my wildest imagination.